So our first speaker, Dr. Hans, is going to deliver the first topic of the presentation titled UNESCO Global Geopark for Sustainable Development. Time is yours.
Terima kasih semua. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. Saya minta maaf ya, saya buat presentasinya dalam bahasa Inggris. Bahasa Indonesia saya belum lancar cukup untuk buat presentasi seperti ini ya. Jadi dalam bahasa Inggris dan saya share screen sekarang for my slides. I hope you're able to view my slides now. What I will do this afternoon is to take you briefly through an overview of UNESCO's global geoparks. The speakers to follow after me will talk in detail about the Indonesian context, about the Nusa Tenggara context. So I will talk a little bit about the global context of UNESCO geoparks, UNESCO global geoparks. Now, importantly, what is the definition of a UNESCO global geopark? It is more than just a label with just a logo. It is a single unified geographical area where sites and landscapes of international geological significance, and this is very important, landscapes of international geological significance are managed with a holistic concept of protection, education, and sustainable development. The UNESCO Global Geopark concept is fairly new. UNESCO first began to work with the concept of geoparks in 2001, so just about 20 years ago. At the time, the idea, the notion of geoparks was not a UNESCO concept. It was a concept formulated and devised by very committed academics, practitioners, enthusiasts in the geosciences who came together in 2004 to form the Global Geopark Network. They gradually grew this network, came together, developed more firm ideas about what constitutes a geopark, and by 2015 had included 120 sites into a global network dominated by Europe and China, but nonetheless a global geoparks network was in place. And then at the end of 2015, just 5 years ago now, UNESCO's 195 member states ratified the creation of a new UNESCO designated site, the UNESCO Global Geoparks. UNESCO also has World Heritage Sites, and there are the UNESCO Jakarta Biosphere Reserves. These are sister sites to the geoparks, if you will, but only the UNESCO Global Geoparks has the geological heritage at its center. And I will get back to that in more detail. So what is the concept of a UNESCO Global Geopark? It is first and foremost a bottom-up approach. What does this mean, bottom-up approach? It means that the only way to create a UNESCO Global Geopark is to work with all of the local and regional authorities, stakeholders, communities, civil society organizations. A geopark is not just a designation made by government or made by UNESCO. It is something that comes from landowners, community groups, tourism operators, geoscientists, indigenous peoples, local organizations, and others. So it's really something that has to grow from the community. To grow something like that, you have to have a firm commitment, a strong partnership that cuts across between different sectors and different interests, those who focus on heritage, those who focus on the sustainable exploitation of natural resources, and those who manage natural resources in line with their traditional practices and beliefs. That, in turn, requires a comprehensive strategy that can bring together all of these different interests while showcasing the site and protecting its geological heritage. So this is very important. These are locally driven sites. UNESCO Global Geoparks have to be protected. there has to be some form of organization in place that protects the site, whether that is indigenous, local, regional, and national is variable depending on the local context, but some form of protection has to be in place. But very importantly, the designation of a UNESCO Global Geopark does not mean that there are restrictions on the economic activity inside the site, as long as that activity complies with the local, national, regional, indigenous legislation. So if things are done within the spirit of the geopark, within the legal framework, it's okay. And now something very important. When a geopark, a UNESCO Global Geopark is designated, it's valid for 4 years only. After 4 years, it will be re-examined, revalidated to see if it is still living up to the expectations of its original establishment. So a geopark is not something that you just create and then leave and you have a sign saying geopark. It's something that has to be continuously worked on all the time to keep the high standard up. Now, all of these criteria and information is set out in the operational guidelines, which are available from UNESCO, and we can provide a link to those. So now, let me just take you through the basic principles of what a geopark is and what it does, a UNESCO Global Geopark. Each geopark, wherever it is in the world, must have 4 fundamental features. It has to have geological heritage that is of international value. So the geological features of each site, each UNESCO Global Geopark, has to be so important that it is of international interest and value. There has to be a management plan in place, a management framework. The park has to promote visibility. It has to actively make itself known, show what it has and what it can do. And it has to take part in networking. It has to link with other sites, link with other places to grow and improve that way. So these are 4 fundamental features. Now, under those 4 features, there are a number of focus areas, and I will just go through those in a few minutes because I think they may be of interest to this meeting and to all of you as experts in geology, because it may help to place the contribution of the geological sciences, of geoheritage, of geological research within the wider societal framework. So first of all, UNESCO Global Geoparks have an obligation to inform people about the sustainable use and need for natural resources. So geoparks can inform about how natural resources are important, whether they are mined or quarried or harnessed from the environment. We need to respect the natural resources even as we utilize them. So there is an obligation to inform. There is an obligation to be aware of geological hazards. So many of the world's most beautiful, most striking geoheritage sites are also places that are subject to geological hazard. And of course, Indonesia, with lying on the ring of fire, with the multiple active volcanoes, frequent earthquakes, tsunami, is very much at the center of this geological hazard. So geoparks help inform people and visitors about geological hazards, what they mean, and how we live with them and be safe, even though we have to live with these hazards. Geoparks hold a record of climate change. In the geological record, we can see evidence of past climatic shifts. Being able to read how the climate changes from our geology gives us an incredible tool to teach and learn about climate change today. So geoparks have an obligation and an opportunity to use geology, geological heritage to show how the climate has changed over geological time. That is also a way to promote tourism and visitation to a site that draws on education and brings in education within the visitation and the experience in the park. So all UNESCO Global Geoparks must have educational activities to share awareness of geological heritage, share awareness of geology and how that relates to natural cultural heritage as well. All geoparks must work with scientific institutions, academic institutions, organizations like your own, in order to actively engage in scientific research in the earth sciences and in other disciplines. So connecting geology, the science of the earth, to other scientific research disciplines. Now we say UNESCO Global Geoparks, they celebrate Earth's heritage while sustaining local communities. So there is a strong connection between exploring and celebrating the Earth and our local communities, our culture. And we just saw during the break before this session, we saw a spectacular cultural performance that linked both modern and traditional elements and drew reference to the Earth and to the local place that it is from. And those connections are a very important part of what a geopark does. Women. UNESCO Global Geoparks have a strong emphasis on empowering women, on ensuring a strong gendered understanding of what a geopark is and what it does. There are a number of education programs undertaken in geoparks around the world that focus on empowering women, developing women's cooperatives, business opportunities, connecting the local economy with the geopark. And that is part of sustainable development in a wider sense, and the title of this talk, of course, is Sustainable Development. Even if an area has world-famous geological heritage, spectacular landscapes like Rinjani Lombok and many other sites in Indonesia, it cannot be a UNESCO Global Geopark unless it has a plan for sustainable development of the people who live there. This can be through tourism, this can be through industries that connect to the geology of the area, but there has to be a plan for how we connect this geological heritage with local development. We can't have a UNESCO Global Geopark that looks beautiful and is spectacular to see if we don't have a plan for improving and strengthening the lives and the opportunities of the people who live there. Finally, a few points on local and indigenous knowledge. UNESCO Global Geoparks must actively engage with local and indigenous peoples. They should help preserve and celebrate cultural diversity, local culture, and we saw beautiful examples of this here during the break today, as I just mentioned.
Sorry, Mr. Hans. Mungkin jaringan internet, mohon ditunggu sebentar. Bisa ditayangkan CP sementara? CP dari 3 pembicara.
Finish this, yeah. Hello? I will continue. I hope you can hear me. The UNESCO Global Geoparks Council is the governing mechanism for UNESCO Global Geoparks. I want to mention this because the Council was very recently here in Indonesia and in Rinjani Lombok. This is a global organization comprising 12 experts chosen for their expertise in the sciences and their professional qualifications. They are the ones who review new applications for geoparks, revalidations of geoparks. They advise UNESCO on the strategy, planning and implementation of the program. So it's not really UNESCO that decides what is a good geopark, what works and what doesn't. It is really an independent council of experts who advise UNESCO on those things. Now these experts came to Lombok last year, 2019, for the 4th Global Council meeting held in Lombok. This was followed by the 6th Asia Pacific Geoparks Network, 2 very successful events. And I highlight this because I think these events show what a geopark must do to network, to not only promote sustainable development in its daily activities, but to share and to invite others to come and to engage and to experience. And I know Rinjani Lombok has also been doing this through virtual events this year. We saw the Geo Heritage Festival. Even though we can't person. I realized at the time I wanted to just contribute to global.
Hilang. Sepertinya kondisi sinyal tidak stabil.
Sorry, Mr. Hans. Any problem?
Yes, I'm back again. Apologies for that. I was lost from the meeting. I have just one more slide to share. If you have time, I can do that. Would that be all right?
Okay.
Okay, I will continue then with my last slide. As I said, there is a very strong connection in Indonesia between the national development goals, the national development planning, and the sustainable development goals. These are reflected through the UNESCO Global Geoparks in Indonesia. So a very strong connection between what Indonesia does at the national level to attain its sustainable development targets and what happens within the geoparks. And as you will have noticed during the presentation, the UNESCO Global Geoparks contribute to a very wide range of sustainable development targets, which again is reflected also in the SDGs. I will finish my presentation there, closing with a picture from the Toba Caldera Geopark in Indonesia as well. Thank you very much for listening. I apologize for the technical difficulties and hope that you managed to hear most, if not all, of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Hans. Give applause, please, to Mr. Hans.